Greetings everyone and welcome to another interview with a game developer. Tonight we have a guest, Caleb Smith, and we're gonna have a chat on game industry and game development in general, and Caleb Smith's thoughts on making games and so forth. So hello Caleb.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing great. So let's start off by with a very simple question, if you don't mind. That who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, totally. Like you said, my name's Caleb Smith. I'm a freelance developer, so I take on basically I'm a hired gun for any kind of game development needs you have right now. I work with a lot of smaller clients and come from just a long background of indie game development, personal projects, modding for the source engine, and just generally following games for like a long time. So it's super awesome to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
All right, yeah, thanks. So do you more of a code or make graphics, or what's your like your skill set?
Yeah, so I do a lot of programming, but I also do a lot of odds and ends. Like I'll do some level design, for performance tweaking and stuff like that. I've been trying to move more into game design and actually coming up with ideas and figuring out the best way to actually execute on them. So,
okay, cool.
I mean, as a freelancer, you kind of have to, and especially in indie dev, you have to put on many hats. So it's kind of hard to always stick to one thing, right?
Yeah. You say that you work as a hired gun. So can you give maybe a short example? What kind of works you or jobs you work with?
Yeah, totally. So currently, I'm working for two clients on two really different types of games. I'll have to give you the links to them so your listeners can check them out. But one of them is a space survival game, pretty early in development right now, and the other one is a MOBA that we are hoping to have pretty close to a Kickstarter and pre-alpha release for it. And before that, I just did a lot of odds and ends, so kind of one-off little jobs where, for example, if somebody needed their project debugged or a bunch of bugs fixed, I would do some of that, or complete like a feature for somebody. It's kind of pretty sporadic work when you're starting off and just trying to grab as many jobs as you can.
Yeah, I totally understand. So do you use most of your time to work with the client projects, or do you still reserve time for your indie games, or what's your current status with that?
So currently I've been spending a lot of time on my client work, which is awesome because this is the first time that I've actually been able to support myself full-time working on that.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's great, man.
Yeah. So hopefully in the near future, once I get some more time and I figure out how to manage my own time better, I'll be able to be working on some new personal projects.
Yeah, cool. So how long you been in the industry in total, making games, unprofessionally or professionally?
Yeah, so it's funny because it still doesn't feel like I'm in games.
Yeah.
I've talked to people who've worked at big companies, and of course they have all these crazy stories about game development and stuff like that. So when you do indie development, I guess it doesn't feel the same. But to actually answer your question, I've been kind of working on games since I was 12, and then to officially put a start date of when I actually started in the industry, I would say I started about 2 years ago as an intern for a local developer here in the States in Arizona. starting off programming.
Oh, so you've been programming for a while, but not with games. Am I right?
Oh no, I've been. It's when I started programming, I learned to program exclusively for games. Like,
Okay, yeah, cool.
I have
Right.
done some other development, but games are always the most fun to work with. So that's where I've been putting my focus.
Yeah. So actually, so why do you make games in the first place?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, it may be a hard one, but because it's obvious, of
Yeah.
course, that well, it's fun and I like playing games and so forth. But maybe there's like a deeper like thought in that, like maybe something that you get out from it, or yeah. So the question why it's asked it too few times in most of the cases that why you do something. So let's try it now. Why do you make
Yeah.
games?
No, it's a great question. I'm just trying to think of like how to couch it into like one good succinct statement without going on for like 30 minutes or something.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, obviously right now, I'm making games to support myself, but the real answer is that, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, but when I was younger, like games, like completely captured like my imagination, right? Like when you're little, it feels like there's a whole other world that's existing when you like start playing a game or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Um, so from a very early age, I was like, this is incredible. This is the coolest thing ever. Like, it would be amazing to create these like in-depth worlds that like people can lose themselves in, and
Yeah.
maybe it is just like killing time, but it kind of brings joy to people, right? And I think that's hopefully why most people make games, is that they want to give people a fun experience to spend 30 minutes, an hour, 6 hours,
Yeah. Yeah.
however long.
Yeah. So so what kind of games did you grow up with? Like what were those amazing worlds which you grew up with as a kid? Yeah.
Well, yeah, when I was a kid, I just grabbed anything I could, right? But
Yeah.
like the big ones that stick out into my mind were like games like Half-Life or Metal Gear Solid, um, games that kind of step over the line from just being simple abstract games, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
uh, they have higher presentational value. They're about more of an immersive or cinematic experience. Um, so those were the big ones. Oh, of course, like Halo and stuff like that. Um, and starting off, I know a lot of people can probably relate to this too. Is that when you start making your own games, right? You look at something big like Halo, and you're like, oh man, I would
Yeah.
love my game is going to be just like Halo, and then you actually
Yeah,
get
of
down to
course.
working
Yeah.
on it, and it's it's it. It's a lot more than one person can do, and especially when you're starting off, you have no idea how much work is actually involved in that,
Yeah,
right?
and I think that's like in many cases when people drop off from making games, when they start to realize that that's not actually kind of an easy to make an Halo, for example, or a game like that. So people start to drop off because they see that it's gonna take a lot of people and a lot of hours to actually manage to do that.
Right. And that's kind of the cool thing, is that it's almost like a litmus test for people who actually who are actually passionate enough to stick it out, right?
Yeah,
Because, while it's impossible for one person to make like a Halo as their first project,
yeah,
your first project is actually still really hard, and it's probably going to be really basic and rudimentary, probably not super fun, and it still takes a ton of time to actually make, right?
yeah.
But if you can stick that out, it's so satisfying when you've made something and somebody can sit down and play it, and you see that they're having like a good time, maybe, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the reward which you get out from it, when you see people reactions, and when those reactions start to turn out as a positive reactions and they actually have fun while playing it, because of course that's not kind of an obvious that people actually enjoy playing your game. It's a
Right.
long shot.
Or it's also, what I find is the coolest is when people are playing your game and they actually play it in a way that you never intended, or they break it in an interesting way. It's like,
Yeah.
even if they're breaking it, right? Like they're spending the mental energy to kind of live in this world and experiment and like reach in directions that you never expected they could actually go.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because when you're playing alone, your game which you made, you just basically go on with circles by trying out the features of the game and doing the same thing all over the time. But and someone who has never played the game before and never tried the controls and so forth, they can actually realize something really special out from the game, good or bad.
Yeah,
You never
exactly.
know. Yeah, but so what do you think, like the game industry in general? So like the situation in being an indie developer in today's world. So do you find it easy to be an indie developer, or what kind of like challenges do you face when making games as an indie?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's definitely a huge difference between being an indie and obviously being in a AAA type scenario, or even a smaller studio. But for indies, I feel like it hasn't. There hasn't been like a better time for indies, right? Like, obviously there's a lot of independent developers right now. If you look at Steam, like it's totally flooded with games, but you know, there's a real opportunity for people out there. Like when I was 12, for example, right? Like there wasn't really much independent game development going on, right? It was all hobby work, or it was like the mod scene, but no one was actually making games with the expectation that they were going to go to market with them, right?
Yeah,
And try and make a living off of it, even though that's very tough. But it's awesome because there's a lot of opportunity out there, and when you're starting off, like it's fairly difficult to get your foot in the door in like an actual studio, but it's great that people have the opportunity to cut their teeth on smaller projects that people are self-funding or getting small crowdfunding for it.
Yes, there's so many options, and of course, yeah, like you said, there are so many opportunities to actually get into making games and actually making out of the living out from that. But the turn side is that a lot of other people have realized that as well. So there's a lot of games out there. If you look at Google Play or App Store, that's like, oh my god, is it like one? How many was the last when I checked, like games released per day on App Store and or Google Play? It was hundreds of games released daily in those stores.
Oh, yeah.
So that's like insane. How do you like get your visibility from that?
Right. Yeah. Especially, I think that's what people are really finding is that like it sucks because like there's a lot of good games that just get lost in the noise of everything else, right? But
yeah,
that's what's cool about like what you're doing here with your whole project. It's like helping people gain visibility for their projects, giving them like a platform to actually share what they're working on and connect with like an audience.
yeah.
Honestly, I think that's like the most important thing as like an indie is that you're constantly trying to cultivate like a community to really get the word out there, because you can't spend that $40 million on TV advertising.
That's true. Yeah. Hopefully we get something going on with this. But so what about like let's go with the tips for beginner game developers. So if I would be a guy or a girl starting to make games, like the very first one, what kind of a tips would you give me, or what yourself, what would you love to hear before you started making games? What kind of a tips?
Yeah, so there's a handful of tips. I'll try to be as concise as possible, but a handful of tips come to mind. One, just stick it through. When you're first starting off, like, everything feels like the greatest challenge that you've hit, and it can be really detrimental to like your motivation to work on stuff when you're just constantly like struggling to get the most basic stuff working. But just realize that that's part of like learning the craft, and the struggle is just like you working through stuff. And if you can get through that, that's awesome. Don't be afraid to share your work. Obviously, don't share, if your work isn't ready, don't share it with like the community at large. But if you can get feedback from close friends or fellow developers, like, always try and get as much feedback as you can. Always seek out mentors, or people that could actually help you learn and give you good direction. Because I know that's another problem, is that when you're starting off, you get yourself into holes where you're like, I really think that my code should be absolutely perfect and hit this engineering standard. That's
Yeah.
not always super important.
Everything should be optimized as good as possible and work smoothly on low-end PCs and stuff like that. Like,
yeah, like you can't shoot that big and that in depth. Like, take your time to do smaller things in smaller chunks, and recognize that's like a huge achievement. And the final thing for beginners is that enjoy being a beginner, right? You don't put the pressure on yourself to deliver a AAA project or deliver something that is perfect, because you're just kind of experimenting with stuff. Try and do a bunch of different roles, right? Like, if you want to be a programmer, you should still try to like do some art and do some design and do some marketing, because it's, even though you might not be using it forever and it might not be the exact thing you want to do, it's excellent to understand like what other people have to go through and what they need to do to get their job done. So I'd say just be flexible, be easy on yourself, and just work through the growing pains, as it were.
Yeah, that's a good motivation speak. That work through the pain. Yeah.
Yeah, not to make it sound like it's horrible,
Yeah. But yeah, that's the fact. It also includes a lot of pain, but need to get the fun out from it anyway. But
yeah,
that's how it
I
goes.
think that's really the most important thing, is like to enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
To enjoy it and just utilize everything you can to get the experience you need.
Yeah. I really hope that people like who are getting in the industry, like beginner level developers, that they actually know how to get the fun out from making games, because I think that's like more of a thing which you need to remind for people who've been in the industry for like 10 years or so, that you need to remind them that do you still remember why you started working in the game industry in the first place, man? like remember that and keep on having fun. But I really hope that a beginner level developers still realize to do that.
Yeah, and like I imagine after, I'm not speaking from my own experience, but I imagine after 10 years of having to go through crunch and all of the pains of actual AAA development, or even indie development, which can have even worse crunch sometimes. It can really burn you out. But definitely, as like a beginner, if you're not having fun doing anything at all, this might not be the best thing for you.
Yeah, that's a good fact. But yeah, it's really hard to like realize that do you enjoy it or not, because making games includes a lot of like situations that you get demotivated from your project or anything what you work with, or games in general, that you have those moments. Everyone has those moments that it's just you're not in any way motivated to work with your project, and that's like the situation in which everyone hopefully has their own community to get support from and get the motivation back to discuss with people who are also working games and so forth.
Yeah, no, and that's the real that's like a real problem, right? Is sometimes I know I actually for about 3 years when I went off to college, I actually didn't pursue any kind of programming or game development or anything like that. I was just kind of I was strangely like burned out, like because I had put a ton of pressure on myself to try and deliver really well engineered code and projects that maybe too were were too big in scope to actually do. And I kind of lost that passion and lost like the fun in it. So I spent like 3 years in college just studying film to kind of get away from it. And then the passion kind of came back. So that would be another piece of advice I would give to people, is that like, you know, if you're not having fun like right from the bat, like maybe the games isn't for you. But if you had fun and you're kind of finding that your motivation is kind of sinking, like definitely take a break if you can, right? And, you know, recharge yourself and remember that life isn't just about one thing. You know, you can enjoy some other things as well and not kill yourself trying to do this crazy thing that we do.
Yeah. That's really good point. But yeah, the last a little let's say a little dreaming question, but the question goes is that if you would be given infinite resources, what would you do?
Infinite resources in like the sense of like money and manpower and all
Everything,
that.
like infinite.
Well, I would build my own private island in the Bahamas first off. But if it had to actually go into like making a game or something like that.
No. It's not even supposed. This is actually a tricky question, because I don't ask that you should be making games. I'm just saying that you would given infinite resources, and what would you do?
No, you know, jokingly, it would be awesome to have your own private island, right?
Yeah.
But I
indeed.
think I'd be kind of silly enough to actually, if I had like infinite resources and ability to actually make something happen, it would be great to have like a studio, like a excellent working environment that you could cultivate, where people could come in and be happy and do what they want to do. Like that would be the dream right there.
Yeah. That's after you spent the first 10 years in that island doing something different, and then you could start thinking of making the game company.
Yeah, just sit on the beach with like a legal pad, working out ideas.
Yeah, I could live with that. Okay, but yeah, so I think our time is up. Like we even had any time, but it's starting to be pretty long podcast for now. So we can continue in another discussion if we like. But for this interview, I think we're done. So if you have any last words or so forth, please go ahead. But anything on your mind?
No, you know, I just want to say, like, if you're listening to this and you are getting started off, just enjoy it. Enjoy it while you can, and fully embrace that. You know, you're a beginner. Hit up everybody in this community, right? Like, you guys have a great community that's very like welcoming and warm. I would try to avoid communities that are more toxic and results driven because, you know, you're a beginner. Like, you should be enjoying it. But besides that, nothing else comes to mind. Thanks for having me on again. This has been really
and thanks for joining the interview. It's great to have you. And but yeah, make sure to join the Jestercraft Discord or Facebook or Twitter. But of course, the Discord is the best way to get in discussion with other fellow developers and so forth. So make sure to jump in for the discussion. But hey, Caleb, thank you very much for joining the interview and having the discussion. And have a great rest of the week, man.
You too. Thanks again for having me. It's been fun.
Right. Thanks and bye.